Hello and welcome back to the Property and Finance Show. My name is KM. I'll be your host as always. And just a quick announcement before we get into today's episode, something very exciting. We've turned on fan mail. And so what fan mail means is that you can send us text messages directly to the episode, and we can get your questions and we can get your fan feedback and whatnot. So link in bio in the show notes if you have any questions and whatnot for future episodes, or if you want to talk to our guests and get them back on, you can let us know. If you want to tell our guests that they're very bad, or or the host is very bad, you can also let them know. So that will be turned on, or it's already on. So it's very exciting news. The next 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a brief overview of a very, very important topic. It's a legal essentials in property buying. And so we've got two guests lined up today and next week. And so it's a 2-part mini series. We'll find a good name for it. As our guest speaks, I'll find something that pops to my mind. But yeah, so it's a legal essentials in property buying and everything you need to know about it. It's very important. You can't get away from it. You have to have this part in your knowledge and have a team around it to make sure everything goes smoothly. And we're going to find out all about it right now. And our guest today, his name is Saimon Sami. He's from Trinity Legal and Migration. Saimon and Trinity Legal actually do all of our work for all of our clients and make sure all of our clients have very smooth settlement process, have excellent legal correspondence, and ensure everything goes to plan. And a lot of things can not go to plan, as we'll find out later in this episode. So we have Saimon. He's a solicitor. He's very experienced. He's been working with us for many, many years alongside of us, like I mentioned. And he's also purchased properties for our clients in Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, Perth. I don't know about Darwin, but everywhere, pretty much everywhere in the country. So he knows the law back to front in every single state. We do a lot of work together. He's also my personal friend, apparently. He's going to Europe without me. But yeah, Saimon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Carlos. Yes, so I thank you for having us. Thank you for having me on the podcast today, and to discuss, all these problems that could arise from property purchasing and with people that don't notice what to look for in the contracts and things like that. Essentially, yes, I have done most of the states. You missed Queensland, but I'll let go of it.
My bad.
Yes, and I am going to Europe, unfortunately, without him, but that's not my fault.
Yeah, sorry. Solicitors make a lot of money, as you'll find out in this episode.
Yeah.
So we can't all travel together at the same time. But anyway, I hope you're feeling better. Today is the day after Barcelona's apparently shock exit from the Champions League. But I mean, I've been saying Inter Milan's going to win the Champions League for years, for the whole year. Sorry, so not that shocked. But I feel you are better today because Arsenal lost.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. It's just like I guess it's silver lining.
Yeah, it's true.
I'll take it.
Anyway, no one listening to this cares about what I'm talking about right now. So let's dive into the property and finance world. So, first question, Saimon: what is the role of a solicitor in a property purchase? Do you need one? Why do you have to have one? What is their role and what do they do?
Okay, so essentially, I think it's the best to look at it as a solicitor is like your personal bodyguard in the legal process, right? So essentially, as a solicitor, your legal guide protect you through the entire property purchase and journey. We handle every single aspect from reviewing the contract, conducting due diligence, providing legal advice, negotiating contract amendments, preparing and lodging, the legal documents for the transfer, going up into the settlement day and managing settlement and looking at the numbers between, your finance and what you need for on settlement day, representing your interests. So essentially, there's a number of things that we touch on that essentially make us, let's put it in a way that it protects the buyer from any outside noise or anything like that.
Yeah, I wrote down the line you said there. I don't know how long you've been thinking about that sentence and how long you've been trying to say it, but your personal bodyguard in the property purchase is very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, came up with it myself.
If you can look at the camera, and say personal I'm joking. We're going to snip that up and put it everywhere. That's amazing. So yeah, actually, that's an excellent description. The solicitor's role is to be the personal bodyguard in the property purchase for the person purchasing the property and or selling the property.
Correct, yes.
In this conversation, we'll be talking about buying. So you are the bodyguard from a legal perspective for the purchaser in terms of property purchase. And so that means you're looking at the contract, the title searches, you're making sure everything stacks up, there's nothing funky, there's no secrets that we don't know about, because real estate agent's job is to sell a property.
Correct.
That's it. They're not fussed about the legal side of things. They don't care about easements, covenants, or this or that, whatever. They just want to sell a property. It's always buyer beware. The buyer has to be aware of everything that's going on, and it's their responsibility to do the checks. And if they don't do the checks and something goes wrong, it's not the seller's fault, actually. That's why you have a solicitor that goes through everything for you. So, quick question. Lots of people ask me, do we have to use a solicitor? I say, well, yeah, someone needs to do it for you. They say, yeah, but can we use a conveyancer? So can you tell us what's the difference between a conveyancer and a solicitor?
Okay. So with property purchase, difference between essentially a solicitor and a conveyancer is solicitors are qualified lawyers, where conveyancers aren't lawyers. Essentially, solicitors and lawyers can handle complex issues, often broader legal issues, where other conveyancers focus solely on the transfer. So from a conveyancer side of things, I can't speak for every conveyancer, but you may not get a letter of advice. You may not get advice on any encumbrance on the property or any zoning laws. Things that are very important are like zoning restrictions, potential council issues, especially if you're trying to maybe knock down and build or build a granny flat or things like that. Conveyancers may not be aware of all the legal ramifications that come from it.
Okay. So why is having a good solicitor important? In a nutshell, I know you've mentioned a bunch of stuff. But why is it important to have a good solicitor as well, and not just any solicitor?
Well, essentially, what you want to know from your client is what they're buying the property for. Is it investment purposes? Is it to build, to knock down and rebuild? Is it for just to live in? It depends on what their goals are, and we have to align ourselves with what their goals are. If someone's trying to buy something to live in and they don't want to build a granny flat, then and the zoning laws don't allow for granny flats, then so be it. It's not a big problem. But if someone is trying to buy something where you can't build on this land for any purpose, heritage listed, it's not big enough, whatever it is, then and no one picks that up prior to buying, then this person is now stuck with such a huge asset which is so expensive that they can't actually now do anything with what they intended to do.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty basic, right? If you're spending $500,000, well, actually, spending $500,000. If you're spending $800,000, $1 million, 1.5, 2 million, 2.5 even is quite normal these days in Sydney. You want to make sure you know exactly what the hell you're buying.
Yeah.
And as a common person, you're not going to know. I'm not going to know. But a solicitor who is trained to understand this is going to be able to figure it out. And I guess a conveyancer might be able to as well, but as Simon discussed, the difference is not a qualified lawyer. And so they're going to be able to really, really help you. Now, let's talk about the purchasing process from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
So from a buyer's agent perspective, we do a lot of data analysis. We find the property, we find the locations we want to buy in for that person. We find the properties, we negotiate, we try and get the best deal under market value. We make a lot of money for the client. Cool. From your perspective, you come in at the end. So we found the property. We've decided this is the one we want to purchase. We believe we can purchase this property under market value. Our client's going to make instant equity. It's in a location with very, very high growth, great yields, etc. And then we negotiate and we get a deal with the agent. And so we agree on a deal. And then we get sent a contract, or the buyer gets sent a contract. At this point, typically, you will step in. What is the standard purchasing process from a legal point of view?
Yeah. The process is lengthy. It's not just a short process. So essentially, you'd start with, like you said, the engagement, where essentially you decide to purchase that property and engage with your solicitor / conveyancer. And essentially, you would then essentially give them the contract to review. In cases where you work with buyer's agent, we'll touch on that a bit later. But essentially, you would send us the contract, or whoever the agent will send the contract to us based on the client giving them the details of the solicitor. Then we would essentially review that contract. By reviewing it, we would go through all the clauses, special conditions. We will then look at due diligence, which is like searches and inquiries, such things like we said before, like zoning, encumbrances, your rates, things like that. We then will provide advice based on both the special conditions of the contract and the due diligence searches we've just done. And then we would negotiate any especially special conditions that are not in favor of the purchaser, or things like, the deposit, or things like the settlement period. There are a few things that, buyers want 8-week settlement, people want 5% deposit. These are the things that you have to negotiate prior to signing these contracts. Then we will essentially exchange. The contract will then exchange based on those terms and based on the agreement between the two solicitors or two conveyancers. New South Wales typically has a 5-day cooling off period where people sometimes ask for 10. Very rare to get, but essentially you may be able to get it. But standard is 5 days, unless you're buying under auction conditions. And then essentially we would, at that point, once cooling off period ends, we look into the pre-settlement phase, where essentially we look at numbers. We discuss things with the banks to see, there's a shortfall account set up. If there is, what's the amount that's needed for shortfall, stamp duty, any transfer costs, things like that. And then we take it to the final stage, which is the actual settlement, where the funds are transferred and the legal ownership of the property passes to the purchaser. And we ensure all documents are correctly lodged with Land Registry. And then essentially on the day, we use a platform called PEXA, which is the online platform for settling. And then once that's done, it's done. Once we move on to post-settlement, we then notify you once settlement is complete, and we handle any final administrative tasks. So essentially, we'll send you all the documents that we've collated from the very beginning.
That's a very extensive process, and there's a lot of work involved. Goes to show you actually quite clearly why you need to have a solicitor on your team, because I was getting confused when you were talking. Like, there's so many things going on. But I want to break that down. So first step, because there was a lot of things in there, and let's break it down so people can really understand. So firstly, when should someone engage a solicitor?
Yeah, so the earliest possible opportunity.
So before they purchase a property, like before they start looking, when they find a property, when is the ideal time?
I think before, like, it's essentially they should let the solicitor know that they're starting to look. Just good heads up. And then once they do find something and they're interested in it, they would then send those contracts to the solicitor to review. Things like that. There are times where you solicitors are engaged later on. However, you find that there was a cooling off period in that meantime. The pro of that is essentially, yep, you've already signed the contracts, you've got your 5 days, we can still negotiate and advise in that cooling off period. However, things like New South Wales, you would lose that 0.25% or something like that. Yes, it is minuscule, but money is money.
Yeah, I think it's very important to know that every state is different. Correct, and you need to really, really understand that state's characteristics and personality before you make decisions. And so this is why we always talk about on this podcast having a team, right? Having your broker, your accountant, your buyer's agent, your solicitors, your building and pest guys, everything. And so because, obviously you just mentioned in New South Wales, you can sign a contract, you do have a cooling off period, but you also pay a 0.25% non-refundable deposit as soon as you sign a contract in New South Wales. And so if you terminate, even in your cooling off period, which you're entitled to do, you are going to lose that 0.25%. And whilst it might sound minuscule, actually, as the property prices in New South Wales or in Sydney keep going up and up and up, you're talking about sometimes $5,000-6,000.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not actually small money. In the grand scheme of things, it might be, but it's still $5,000 that you lost for absolutely no reason. But also, every state has its own characteristics. Like in New South Wales, contracts are actually prepared typically before you sign a contract. So if you go to view the property, they often will give you the contract, and then you can pass that to your solicitor whilst you're still deciding if you want to purchase a property or not. So in that scenario, you can engage the solicitor quite early, and so they can review the contract before you sign anything because it's available. In Adelaide, for example, contracts don't exist unless you have a deal. They don't prepare a contract. And also, a contract in New South Wales is different to a contract in South Australia. A contract in New South Wales has everything. It's a title search. It's got the the purchaser details, the seller details, everything. Everything's all there. In South Australia, the contract is a very standard template that the Real Estate Institute in South Australia has created, and it's literally who's selling, who's buying, if there's a tenant, and then any special finance clause. What has a lot of the information is the title search, which is often in South Australia. Actually, it's a different form.
Yeah, the Form 1.
It's a Form 1. So it's very important to know every state is different, and you cannot go into each state thinking the exact same rules apply because they don't. In South Australia, there's no deposit paid on signing a contract. But in New South Wales, you have 5 to 10 days cooling off. In South Australia, you only have 2 days. In WA, for example, there is no cooling off. But we'll get into all of that. So it's very important, though, to know when to engage your solicitor and like Simon said, as early as possible. During the process, you mentioned a contract review phase.
Yeah.
When you're actually looking at this document.
Yeah.
That everyone is scared to sign. And there's always issues back and forth. What are you actually doing during a contract review phase?
Okay. So essentially what we do here is, again, I think this is probably the most important part of the whole process, like we discussed before. Essentially, you're identifying the parties of the property. So you're looking at the buyer and the seller. You're essentially looking at checking the inclusions and exclusions. You find that a lot of the time, people have been told, yep, there's going to be this barbecue included or this outdoor, table or whatever it is, but they're not in the inclusion list. If these things are missed and you do sign the contract and you do go ahead on settlement, when you come to see, hey, where is this table? And it wasn't in the inclusion list, it's too bad. If it's not, it's not in a contract, not in writing, it never happened. So we have to verify what's included in the sale. Then you review the special conditions. Again, New South Wales is a much, much bigger contract than any other state where we'll have a lot of special conditions. And the special conditions essentially will discuss things like any encumbrances on the land. If you're buying the property as is, and you have to do your own inspections, and it's basing everything on the buyer. It puts a lot of responsibility on the buyer rather than the seller. And then essentially we check the settlement date, we identify any potential risks and ambiguities in the contract, and then consider any special circumstances if the buyer has them. If maybe they're essentially buying from, if they're using trust money, if they're using a normal loan, if they need a longer settlement period, they need a shorter settlement period, things like that.
Okay, that's cool. So what would you say some of the more common issues that get picked up when you're reviewing the contract?
Yeah, most common issues are essentially special conditions. Your special conditions are the most essentially your biggest issues in any contract. They place undue risk and obligations on the buyer, where I think, again, an example of it would be, you're buying the property as is. So essentially this is how it is and this is how you're going to buy it. If you like it, you don't, you don't. So essentially, if you haven't done any of your due diligence where you've done building and pest inspections and things like that, you might get into a problem where this property that you're buying has structural issues, termite issues. It's on heritage land, example. It's on, any of these major things that if you don't do a building and pest inspection on, then essentially you will not be able to do anything on this land.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I have a question about settlement day.
Yeah.
It was part of the process that you're talking about. What actually happens on settlement? I know you talk about PEXA and whatever, but what is actually happening on settlement day, and how does a property go from seller to buyer?
Yeah. So on settlement day, at that point, everything's already ready. So essentially, like we discussed the process. The process all leads up into settlement day. So when we get to the settlement day itself, essentially everything should be ready. And what PEXA does is what your question is, what happens is the transfer of ownership goes from the seller to the buyer. So the transfer happens on that day. So yes, your contract was signed 35, 42, 65 days ago, but the property is not yours until settlement day, until that transfer is lodged with the land registry of that specific state.
So why does it take? So most settlement days are 40 days or whatever.
Yeah.
Give or take. Is that time literally there to allow for time for this process to occur?
No, that time is there mostly for essentially people to do their building and pest, people to do their finance. Most properties are bought by finance rather than cash. However, if you are doing a cash purchase, no, you can have a settlement day up to 40. You can have a 14-day settlement period.
Yeah. So it can happen quite quickly.
It can happen, bro.
Yeah. Now, before we move on, you've mentioned PEXA. And so for anyone that's not aware, PEXA is an online portal where Simon and the solicitor on the other side, they meet up, they virtually, and things occur in this portal, and it's all virtual. Now, PEXA, you may be surprised to hear, is relatively new.
Yeah.
And I find this very funny. Simon, can you tell people what was it like settling a property before PEXA?
It used to be going to the city, I believe, in some big SIA Global would probably be the building that most settlements happened in, and you would walk in and start screaming people's names. Essentially, you would be like NAB, ANZ, and then you have to find, and they'd put their hand up.
Like, can you set the scene? So you go into a building.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you and this other dude are meeting up.
No.
How many people are in this room?
In that room? Oh, you're talking about over 100.
How big is the room? Like, are we talking like a boardroom size, like a bedroom size, like standard?
It's like kitchen, lounge. It's a floor. Like if you think about a building, like
an office level.
An office level floor.
Okay, so it's not tiny.
It's not tiny, no.
But it's not.
It's not massive.
It's not massive, and you got 100 people.
More than that, yeah.
You got 150, 200 people.
You've got banks.
Yeah.
All banks are there.
Yeah.
All representatives.
So they've got a representative for a bank.
From each bank.
From every bank.
A lot of banks.
So the buying bank, the selling bank of every single person settling in this building.
So if you think about the big four, they're all there. And then you've got your 30 lenders. Some of them are there if they've got settlements that day. Then you've got all the solicitors from the seller side. You've got all solicitors from the buyer's side. You have then people from the titles office to do the transfer. And you also have, if needed, you would have a representative from like Sydney Water or something like that, or to do the water charges.
So there's a crap load of people in this building.
Yeah.
And because there's like 100 settlements happening, and then you got 2 solicitors per settlement, you got 2 banks per settlement. That's 4 people. So you're talking 400 people minimum, right? And then you walk into this room. And like, there's no order and like organization. You literally yelling out.
Yell. You would yell. I remember.
So you're just yelling out.
My first time I had to do it.
Like John Smith settlement.
Yeah. You'd either yell the property address, the solicitor's name,
How long did it take to find the correct people?
Oh, pretty quick, surprisingly.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty quick. You'll find them. And then they're sitting on a table, and then you go, and then you have an instruction sheet, and the sheet will tell you, 1, exchange this check with this person. Number 2, exchange check with this person. Number 3, go drop off check to bank A.
So you're literally holding a check.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, if you're like in Sydney, right, typical purchase price is like 1.15 million. Whatever, let's just say you're representing a client buying a $1.5 million property.
Yeah.
Do you have a check for $1.5 million in your hand?
You would have a check for around that money, yes.
And then do you just give it to the other bloke?
Yes, and he would give you checks for the adjustments, and you'd give them to the bank.
And then the bank guy is standing there on either side of you.
Yeah.
They take the money, they put it in a briefcase, and they run to the bank before they get robbed. Like, is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they. I never saw what the banks did afterwards.
What was the security like in this building? Was there any security? Or
Was
was
this
it
a
pretty
normal,
relaxed?
it's a normal building?
That's
like I just
crazy.
went in, clicked the elevator, went up.
So how long did a settlement take? Like on settlement day,
Oh,
how long did it take?
you're talking about like, including travel?
Yeah, including travel.
Oh, like 4 or 5 hours
And how long does a settlement take now?
within 45 minutes.
That's amazing. Technology. Technology. Sorry.
The other
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other issue that I would bring up is back then, if you're 1 cent short on any check, settlement will fail that day. Not for that you can't fix it that day anymore.
Right, because you need a full new check.
Yeah. You can't fix it. Like you have to go home.
And what happens? You've got this check, and you're on the train, right?
Yeah.
And like, you're walking, and it's raining. You're walking to the building, and then I don't know, your phone rings, so you pull out your phone, and like, I'm sure the check's not just in your pocket, but let's just say it was.
Mm.
And then like the check falls into like a puddle of water, and like you got to pick it up and like dry it. Like, settlement's not happening.
Settlement's not happening.
This is silly.
But that's also
It's a wonderful.
That's
It's a great experience that you experienced.
yeah. It's still crazy.
You'll
but-
never ever have to do that again in your life.
No, but some states still do that.
Which states?
I believe the Northern Territory still does it. Like they refuse to use PEXA. I'm unsure of which other state refuses to use PEXA currently, but I know the major states do, like Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland. They all use PEXA.
What, the NT?
I'm not sure, but the NT is definitely not on it because I remember we were trying to.
Yeah. Anyway, Northern Territory. Thanks for that. But we love Northern Territory and the people there, just not their settlement systems. Anyway, moving on. So let's talk about some investor pitfalls. That was a very cool story. I enjoyed that. Thanks for sharing. But let's talk about some of the top legal mistakes investors make.
They tie in with essentially what we were talking about before with the process. So essentially, it's not actually ties in more with the whole solicitor conveyancer conversation. Not conducting thorough due diligence is one big thing that is a massive legal mistake where investors make. Using standard contracts without understanding the implications, so not realizing that standard clauses might not suit their specific investment strategy. As I was discussing before, we always have to understand what they're buying it for. Ignoring potential zoning or development restrictions. Not structuring their investment correctly. We see this a lot where the person purchasing has already a tenant in that place. If those tenancy agreements aren't there, or they're essentially poor tenancy agreements, then the buyer is now responsible for that tenant, and then therefore they're essentially responsible for that tenancy agreement. If that tenancy agreement hasn't been set up prior to them purchasing, or it wasn't there or anything like that, then there is no proof of this person paying you whatever it is amount as a tenant if you're an investor.
Yeah.
And then also not understanding their obligation as a landlord, if that's the case, if they're buying that property with a tenant in it.
Mm. And the laws are constantly changing, especially around tenancy laws. And, very soon in New South Wales, it's going to be almost impossible to say no to pets. Tenants that want pets, for example. So these things are constantly changing. You really, really got to be aware, and your solicitors are going to be aware of all of these. So it's good to talk to them. What are some clauses? Just a couple of examples that buyers should always double check before they proceed.
I would say definitely your settlement date.
That's a good one.
Your settlement period.
It's good to know when you're settling.
Yeah, always. Because some people think, it's 42 days, quite standard. But then some contracts have 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. Some contracts have 13 weeks, and they're the ones that have major problems. Example, New South Wales, stamp duty has to be paid within 3 months of the contract signing date. So if it's a 13-week settlement, you have to pay stamp duty prior to settling. Right. In unfortunate events when you don't settle, the government will return your money for that property because you have never acquired it. But it's very, very rare you'll find 13-week settlement periods, but it has happened. And essentially you would want that, to know when you're settling. So especially if you're paying stamp duty prior. Building and pest inspection clauses are very important, because if you don't have them and something is wrong with the property, then you're stuck with that property, stuck within a contract. And if you default on the contract, you're liable for that price, but you have a property that has termites or structural issues. Finance clauses is another one. I know a lot of people, you don't see it too much in New South Wales where you have finance clauses, but you see them in a lot of other states where essentially there's a clause that allows you to pull out of the contract if finance isn't given by a certain date. I guess this is happening more and more common these days where, banks are asking essentially for an arm and a leg to give you a loan, where essentially you don't know if you're going to get this loan. You're not unconditional yet. They have to do a valuation. They come valued under, things like that. That clause essentially helps the buyer pull out of that contract without any ramifications. Yeah, so I would say, the top three would probably be building and pest, your finance clause, your settlement date.
Cool. What are some tips for investors looking to buy interstate? Well, obviously in Sydney. So when we say interstate, so talking outside of New South Wales, do you have tips for these investors from a legal perspective? Understanding the legal differences, for example.
Yeah. My number one tip would be engage a solicitor that is licensed and experienced in that state.
Yeah. Such as
myself.
Yeah.
No,
Thanks.
Yeah.
Such as Trinity Legal
Migration. Yes, because not all solicitors will do all states.
Yeah.
Again, so if you ask me a question about Northern Territory, I can't answer you.
Yeah.
I've never done it. I don't know. I can't say I can. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's very similar to Tasmania. But things like New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Victoria, these are states that we've been working and purchasing in for the last 3 to 4 years. So we're aware of their laws. We're aware of the regulations that are changing around them. We're aware how the contracts looks, things like that. You have to understand specific contract laws in every state, right? So property is local, and so is property law. So don't assume that your home state rules apply everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, you keep going.
No.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, it's like what we were talking about before. Understanding the differences, understanding that every state is different from a buying perspective, and then also the legal perspective. And so, yeah, that's why we do use Trinity Legal and Migration, and Simon and Adriana and Jordan and the rest of the team, because they can do pretty much every state that we purchase in, and so they know those contracts and the legalities and the personalities back to front. For example, Western Australia, there's no cooling off period.
No, there isn't.
And so if you're buying a property in Perth or WA for the first time and you're hearing no cooling off period, you're going to freak out.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of clauses that do protect you.
Correct. Like building and pest, finance.
Yeah. These are standard clauses in WA. You don't have to negotiate for it. It's just
they're there.
But there are also differences. There's in Queensland, a building and pest clause. The buyer has the decision after the building and pest inspection is completed, what they want to do with that information.
Correct.
Do they want to negotiate for a better price? Do they want to negotiate to have the work fixed? Or do they want to terminate the contract based off the building and pest? In WA, it's not that simple.
No. I think you will have to let them know within a certain period of time, and the vendor will then make a decision if they want to fix it or not.
Yeah. So the vendor actually has the right. So whilst you don't have a cooling off period, you do have a building and pest clause. But based off the results, the vendor actually makes a decision on whether they want to fix it, give you a price reduction or not.
Yeah.
And so if you found structural damage, the vendor has the right to say, I'm going to fix it. And you might be thinking, okay, cool. If the vendor's going to fix it, what's the big deal? Sometimes you really don't want to buy that property if it had structural damage, even if that's been fixed, because that might lead to more problems down the line, even though it's been sorted out. Or why were there issues? And so really the vendor has a lot of power there. So it's really good to understand the differences. And so sometimes you might do a building and pest before signing a contract in WA. So it's very important to know the differences in in states and the legal requirements. Now, I feel like a story.
Before you continue, there's one more. Sorry,
you've got a big point.
Yeah, sorry. There's the other thing that's probably a massive difference between the states is stamp duty. Right, stamp duty is a big one, because essentially they all have different calculations on how they calculate stamp duty. But example, in Queensland, to purchase a home to live in or to invest are different to stamp duties. They're two different prices, rather than New South Wales where it's standard. If you're investing, if you're buying, it doesn't really matter. It's the same price. I can't keep up with who's most expensive currently.
Victoria.
Okay. There's your answer.
Yeah.
That's who's Victoria also has land tax based on $200,000 and above.
Yeah, so the land tax rules changed.
Yeah.
So the land tax threshold has decreased dramatically
to 200. Yeah.
And so pretty much if you're buying in Metro, Melbourne or Geelong or something, you're going to be paying land tax.
Yeah, it's not substantial, but yeah,
but it's something that you have to pay.
Correct.
That you weren't paying before.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are good points. Stamp duty does differ state on state. South Australia has stamp duty, then it's got this extra little one on top.
Yeah, transfer duty that
people get
shocked by.
New South Wales is just the one, but it's quite hefty. Victoria is quite big. Yeah, everyone is different, and actually it's quite difficult to calculate. But luckily, one of our sponsors on this show, Property Calculator Australia, you can just plug in all your numbers, and it'll literally tell you how much the stamp duty is within 3 seconds.
Does help.
So you download that app. Okay, I'm in the mood for a story.
Yeah,
and I want to hear a story, and I don't want you to be modest. I don't want no humility. I want to enjoy a story. Doesn't have to be long. I want to know of a story of an example of a deal where your legal intervention saved the client. Maybe save the client from buying a dud or something crazy, or saving hundreds of thousands. I don't know.
Yeah,
I want to be entertained.
So, funny enough, it's actually one of the ones that you sent us once, quite a while ago now.
Did the buyer's agent make a mistake?
No buyer's agent's mistakes here. It was more persistence from the client rather than anything else. The buyer's agent found the property where it was a very good price, very high yield. So this purchaser loved it. They wanted it. They want to buy it no matter what happened. They want to sign contracts immediately. Very rare, because normally they don't want to sign anything. But in this circumstance, they were so eager to get this because, it had a very good yield, very good price. I think it was undervalued because that's what, KM does, him and his team. But essentially, they were going to buy this place just based on a virtual tour. No building and pest, no nothing. They just said, okay, yeah, well, someone will walk through with a camera and they'll show you the house and that's how you buy it. And he said, yep, that's amazing. I'm going to get to see the house and I live, in New South Wales and I'm buying in, I think it was Queensland, yada, yada, yada. And the contract included a special condition stating that you're buying the property as is and there's no recourse for any defects. During our review, we strongly advised against proceeding without a physical inspection or a building and pest inspection by a professional, and highlighted the significant risks of this clause. The client in the beginning still said, "Nah, it's all right. I trust them. It's all good. I have the virtual tour. I've seen the house. It's really good." We kept insisting that if you go ahead, there's the ramifications of something you find in the walls, termites, like you said before, structural damage will cost you who knows how much these days, not a builder, but a lot of money. Then this person is now stuck with this home, can't live in it, can't tenant it out, can't do anything with it, can only sell it, but has to sell it and also let them know that there's structural damage because now he's aware of it. The client initially resisted wanting to secure the property. However, after persistent advice by myself, they agreed to do the building inspection. The inspection revealed significant structural issues that would have cost about $10,000 to $20,000. Ultimately, essentially asking the vendor to fix these problems. The vendor had no clue of these issues. and essentially said they were unable to fix it at the time. So essentially, we pulled out of that contract and saved the client substantial financial loss and the property riddled with problems.
It's a nice story.
Thanks.
I liked it.
Yeah.
You saved a life.
No,
I was trying
not
to.
a
I was trying to
doctor.
think the entire time who you're referring to, but I actually can't.
I can't remember. The
I
name
can't
either.
think of this particular transaction. But very interesting. It's a good story, and you know these are real life things that can occur, and it happens every single day where people are not aware or savvy in this industry because it's not what they do day in day out for work, and so it's very important to have the solicitor on your side to really, like you said, really early on, be your personal bodyguard. Now we'll start wrapping this up, but a couple final points. Obviously, we work very closely, and it's good for the solicitor. I believe it's good for your solicitor and your buyer's agent to have a good working relationship, because often there are times where, not just with the solicitor, often there are times with like the broker where I will call a client's broker and we'll get some information. There's things going on back and forth. We go back and forth. We sort issues out, and the client has absolutely no idea any of this is happening. Like there's so much work that happens behind the scenes, and we don't want to trouble the client. Maybe we should let them know. So maybe they give us a tip. But there's so much work going on behind the scenes. Like you said, the process is massive. There's so many things going on, and so sometimes with finance. There are issues with finance, or we need rent. The brokers like we need rental appraisal, this and that. And if we know the broker, like if it's a Power Loans broker, for example, Ferdy, Mark, Mateo, Matthew, whoever's there, they call me and they just say, "Hey, KM, can we get a rental appraisal? We get these figures." And the clients absolutely got no clue. They're chilling and they're peaceful, and that's the entire idea of the team, is that things are peaceful for you. There's no stress. A lot of the times, the same thing with the solicitor. Just yesterday, we were discussing name change. One of our clients is changing their name. Contract's already signed. So instead of going to the client and saying, "Hey, call the solicitor," because I know who they're working with, it's very easy. I just pick up the phone, call Simon or Adriana or whoever's doing the job, and explain the process, explain the issue, and get things fixed. Actually, 2 days ago, I called the agent, got Simon on the call, and we had a three-way phone call. Conference call, and smashed out a bunch of details for this client. And like I said, the client's got no idea that any of this is happening, but things are getting worked out in the background. So my question to you is, how does a solicitor and buyer's agent work together best from your perspective? Because I think from our perspective, when you know the other person and you've done a lot of work, it becomes almost, even though we're separate companies, it becomes like a one-stop shop and everything just flows. Do you have the same opinion? Do you have any other?
I agree.
Stories?
I think you hit the nail on the head with essentially with working within this essential team that's again separate companies, but there's like one team really that we work with. We have early communication, we have clear information, between each other, coordinated, due diligence. So we know we know when settlement day is, we know when finance date clauses are. So, with example, when we do work, with Power Loans, they know the finance date. I know the finance date. First Brick knows the finance date. So essentially, there's not only just that you have someone looking after each thing, but you have the other person knowing these very crucial dates to the client. So if the client calls any of us, they can get the same answer. It's a very streamlined process, like Carlos mentioned, where essentially you don't actually, if my communication with my clients should only be in the very beginning, where I'm talking to them about the advice and advising them. And if any questions arise, they're always welcome to call me at any time and answer their questions. But other than that, I don't require anything from them up until a week or two before settlement, where little logistics and admin and things like that are needed. Other than that, it's ultimately both solicitor and the buyer's agent working towards the same goal, helping the client secure the right property under the best possible terms.
Yeah, amazing. So make sure you have your team set up, and make sure, I think, well, for example, we've got a client at the moment who's using a different solicitor. They wanted to use their own, which is cool. We don't force anyone to use you guys. We don't put we don't threaten them. I mean, sometimes we do, but anyway. So he is using his own fella, which is cool. But the amount of back and forth that this client is experiencing from myself and from the solicitor, because we don't know each other, we don't work together, and this solicitor has his own particular style of doing things, and we have our style of doing things, and we're not clashing, but we're not in full sync because he doesn't know how we do things either. So like with Simon, for example, in Trinity Legal, when we're buying a property in Queensland or South Australia or whatever, they know exactly what we're going to do. For example, in South Australia, we're not stressed. We got 2 days cooling off. There's no risk of there's no risk if you terminate. You haven't paid anything. For us, it's like a no-brainer. Sign 100 contracts if you need to, and then terminate 99 of them, and then continue the one. But that way, you've got it under control. Then we can get Simon to. And a lot of solicitors don't like that, and even Simon might not like that. To be honest, I really haven't asked him, but he knows what we're going to do, so he knows our process, and so he works with our process. And then likewise, we know when he's going to touch point with the client and whatnot. So it works. This other client who's using their own people, so much back and forth. Even like we did a building and pest inspection, and we got some things that we want to negotiate. Typically, I just send an email to the agent. Firstly, I call the agent, then I send an email, and then 99% of the time we get it resolved. In this scenario, the solicitor wants to do things through him and send it across to the vendor solicitor, who's then going to have to call the agent, who's then going to have to call the client, the vendor itself, and then the vendor's going to have to tell the agent's going to have to tell the vendor solicitor is going to have to tell the buyer solicitor is going to have to tell me, and then I'm going to have to tell the client. Very long process to do something that I usually do in like under 10 minutes. But simply because he's got a different process, and so sometimes having a team that really understands each other is really beneficial for you as a client. But this has been a really good episode, so I'll just recap. So a solicitor is your personal bodyguard in the property purchase process. They are different to conveyancers. They are legal professionals, legal solicitors, legal lawyers, qualified legal lawyers. They are qualified lawyers. Their impact and their role is to protect you throughout the process. Simon's given us a really detailed description of the entire purchasing process from a legal perspective, and when you should engage a solicitor as early as you can, what happens during each phase, some common issues and mistakes that people make. We've also discussed the differences in states and how important it is to understand those differences, and your solicitor will be well aware of all these things. We've heard some really, really cool stories as well. So it's been a really interesting episode. But as you can probably tell from listening, there's so much more to unpack. And because of that, we've got our follow-up episode next week with another member of the Trinity Legal team. We'll keep that one a secret until next week. We'll keep it a surprise. But it's been a really good episode. And there's so much more to unpack. So we'll see you guys next week on that one. But quickly, Simon, any final thoughts or things you wanted to put out there that you're dying to tell someone? Someone's listening to this right now.
No, not really. Essentially, it's good to always remember that these things take time. Rushing things is not always the best avenue for this type of stuff. So yeah, fast is good, but safe and fast is better.
Oh, you got a lot of quotes today.
Yeah, I like them.
I've known you for a long time. You don't know no quotes.
I know a lot of
There's
quotes.
a lot of research.
No, that's a lot of research.
Yeah, but that's prep.
Yeah,
that's prep. That's good.
Thanks.
Cool. If someone wants to reach out to you and they need you to have a look at a contract or want you to take over and help them with their process for purchasing a property, where can they reach you or Trinity Legal?
They can reach out. They can reach me personally on Simon at trinitylegalmigration.com.au, or better is info@trinitylegalmigration.com.au.
We'll put all of those in the show notes, and just because someone's going to send you an email and they're going to send it to Simon SIMON, and that's not how you spell your name.
Yeah, no.
So we will put all of this, all the emails in the show notes. So if you need to reach out to Simon or Trinity Legal, it'll all be there. Thank you very much, Simon, for joining.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll have you on again once we get some feedback from this episode on the fan mail button that you can find in the show notes as well. So if you have any questions or whatnot, please use the button. We're trying to invest heavily into this podcast, not just with gear. Today we've think we figured out how to use the microphones. It took another 2 hours to work it out, but I think the audio has come out quite well compared to last week. That could have just been KG being poor on the microphone. He won't listen to this, so it's fine. Anyway, thank you very much. It was a very good episode, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.